Hi, this is Linda with Watery Wishes, and today I'm trying my hand at some hand-drawn watercolor poinsettias using my watercolor pencils from Faber-Castell. So before I decided to draw on a piece of cardstock, which I believe is actually Canson XL cardstock, I drew a representation on a cheap piece of paper using some graphite pencil. So I had an idea of what I was going to do before I actually started drawing on the watercolor paper. So I'm drawing a few of these flowers, only one full flower and parts of another two. And as you can see, I'm trying to vary where I put the petals so that they're not all just overlapping in a circular pattern. I want them to be a little bit more random. So I don't want the right of the petal to always be overlapping the left of a petal. I want it to look like they unfolded naturally like a flower does. So this is a fairly simple drawing that anyone could do. It's a fairly simple flower to draw. Now I'm just adding some more green foliage in around where those two flowers meet. And as you can see, I'm going back and forth between the two flowers. Now I'm going to draw just the part of one of those flowers on the corner there. So I'm basically filling in, I'd say, about a half of the card in a diagonal aspect. And now I'm just using the pencil that I drew the parts with to lay down a little bit of light colouring so that I can use some water and create a base layer of colour for those petals. Now, you could use a water brush for this. I opted not to this time. I'm actually using a Royal Langnickel watercolour brush, and I find these brushes are nice and snappy. They're not really soft and moppy, so you can actually get a lot better detail in smaller areas, I find, with these. But I'm definitely not a trained watercolorist, so I just go with what I find easiest in my hand, and that would be these. And I find that I have much more control over the colour because I have much more control over the amount of water that I'm using with this set of brushes. So I'm not overly worried about shading and lighting yet, just because I really just need that base layer of colour in. And because I'm using minimal water, they are drying rather quickly. I mean, this is sped up 5 times normal speed because, you know, even though I would love to be able to draw in and watercolor that quickly, it's virtually impossible. So now I'm just coming in with a little bit more, and I made these, because the paper is still a little bit damp, these lines that I've just put back into those petals are a little bit more dominant and a little bit more permanent. So by coming in with the water brush on those lines, it gives a little bit of shading and definition where the veins and the petals meet. So still at this stage, I'm not overly worried about contrast and depth. I'm just trying to get the look of the petals a little bit better, and now I'm using some of this green that I used to draw the foliage with, the leaves. And as you can see, you can use these pencils with a brush to the tip of them, or you can draw with them on dry paper or on wet. And as with the flowers, this is just a base layer of colour. I'm not so worried about depth and contrast just yet. And here I'm doing the same with the leaves as I did with the petals, just outlining the petals to give the structure of the petals more definition within the watercolour. I sort of messed up on that corner, but I fixed it up later on. And one of the advantages of using watercolour as a medium, any type of watercolour, whether it be, you know, a water-soluble crayon or a watercolour pencil or just straight up watercolours out of the tube or a pan, is you can build up the colour and intensity as you go, and it's a lot more forgiving when you're creating depth because of its transparent nature. So you have to go over it a couple of times to get a really deep, rich tone, unless you use very little water on a say a liquid watercolor or a tube or pan watercolor. But using it like this, you can build up transparent layers over time, and it gives you some depth. Now here I've brought in like an olive green, but I actually bring in a black pencil because I find that the olive green wasn't giving me enough contrast, and that's what I'm trying to do now, is I'm trying to darken up the deepest layers of leaves, the ones that are most overlapped by the leaves on top. And I continue to do that mostly from the bottom leaves, and then I'll darken up the ones that are just above that, and then the ones that are just above that, and then I go in and lay the shadows of where the petals fall over the leaves. And this gives a real look of depth to the image drawn, so it's not as flat. And though I don't feel I did this extremely well or even very well, I did at least give the impression of depth. Though I have seen it done masterfully better. But at my skill level and my experience, I'm happy with the result I got. And you can really only get better by doing. So if you find that you're not perfect with watercolour, just keep at it. It's not something that you can just jump into and be perfect at straight away. I'm certainly not. So I encourage you all to experiment, not just with watercolour, but all different types of things. You know, we learn through our failures. So get out there and try it. And arts and craft is supposed to be about the fun you have, not how perfect it is. So I think this is my second time using these watercolour pencils. They were a new purchase for me. And I really, really enjoy using them. So here I am just trying to get a little bit more of last finishing touches of depth into that foliage. And then I'll start working on the petals of the actual flowers. Laying down colour on the darkest ones first. I find that if you work back to front, so the furthest away or the most deeply covered parts of an image, you can get the back ones really dark, and then you can lighten as you go up the levels of closeness. And I find that helps to get a really good gamut of tone in your contrast. So here I'm just deepening up the colour of where those petals are overlapped. And as you can see, I'm working up and getting slightly lighter on the next level of petals. And I've laid the colour in where the petals overlap, and I'm sort of bringing the water to them where the colour is. Although I went a little bit too dark on the one in the corner. I believe I go and fix that by darkening up the underneath petals even more. Because these pencils, just like any other sort of watercolour, they do dry back lighter. Here I am just scribbling a paint onto my glass Tim Holtz tonic matte. Laying in more colour. it's a little bit difficult to grasp the tonal difference on this footage. But it does show better in the photo image at the end. So there I am, deepening up those petals on that corner flower. Getting a little bit more contrast between the flowers. And then I I actually painted some grey along the edge. And I think I did that with a watercolor crayon, but you could do it with just regular watercolors. And I'm cutting that down to card size. And the reason I painted that grey on the side is because I had a little bit of flicked paint and I needed to cover it up. So now I'm actually deciding what ink to use, but I go with clear embossing ink. And I made a bit of a mistake here. I should have used regular white embossing powder, but I used some fine detail white powder because it was on top on my desk, and the fine detail on bigger sentiments isn't perfect. It's really good for tiny ones, but you'll see in the end photo there is a little bit of clingers on that got hit with the heat tool, and it needed a lot of cleaning up, even though I had used my the powder to my powder tool to try and stop that from happening. And now I'm just going in with a white gel pen that I had to clean up because it had gotten a bit of black on its tip somehow. And that's basically the card. I stick it to a landscape top folding A2 size card base with some score tape because it is watercolor cardstock and it is warped a little bit from the watercolor and the embossing. So that's the finished card. I hope you liked it. If you did, hit the like button. If you didn't like it, hit the dislike button. I've stopped putting as many links in my description. If you want to know what a product is, ask me in the comments. If you did like the video, I'd love it if you subscribed. I really appreciate all my subscribers and followers. I'll see you guys in the next one. And don't forget, have fun crafting your imagination. Bye.